Minister. Good morning, colleagues. We are here for this briefing of today, whereby the Minister is going to be taking us through the progress in terms of the implementation of the Energy Action Plan that was launched last year in July by the President. The Minister will also be taking us the progress, not only of the current, but the annual progress, given the fact that we have reached a year milestone. He will also be taking us through a program whereby we are trying to encourage the electricity users to use electricity responsible as well. So we'll be having that particular launch of that program today as well. Once more, my name is Nomonde Mnugwa, the Acting Director General of the Department of Government Communication and Information System. Colleagues, you are most welcome. Let us welcome to the podium the Minister of Electricity, Dr. Ramokgopa, who's going to be taking us through. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sis Nomonde, and just to also thank members of the media for making time to join us this morning, and also to make it possible that you use your various platforms to share with the South African public the work that we are doing in trying to resolve the single biggest existential problem that is confronting us, and that is of the energy deficit in the country. I will be reflecting today a bit more on the strides that we have made over the past 12 months. As all of you might know, is that July marked the first anniversary of the Energy Action Plan, which was unveiled by President Ramokgopa in July of 2022. So we thought that as part of just ensuring that we embed transparency, accountability in the work that we are doing, we are going to give you a balance sheet of the work that we have done over the past 12 months. Of course, in some areas there's significant and commendable strides. In other areas, we are still lagging behind the targets that we had set for ourselves, but we will indicate the work that we are doing to ensure that we recover on those areas of underperformance. And before I do that, I'll just very quickly just give you the highlight of the week that was, so that there's an appreciation of the kind of progress that we are making on a real-time basis, and real-time in this instance with a delay of about 3 days, because I report until the Friday of the previous week. I'm happy to indicate that the Unit 2 that was damaged partly by fire, and I did indicate that really is the control and instrumentation components at the Rooftop is back online. And I really want to commend the head of generation, Mr. Numalo, and the general manager, the Tsepiso at Rooftop, and the team for retaining the unit as promised. And I did indicate that it is important that when we make a public pronouncement in relation to the speed with which we are going to retain the units on stream, that indeed we keep to that promise. And in that way, we are going to reduce that one measure of our performance called the outage slip. So just to congratulate the team for the work that they've done. So just on the previous week, the average you can see is about 29,277, and I think it's an excellent performance. We can see that we are still averaging about 60% of the EAF. Of course, the week before, we did see some degree of reduction in terms of the capacity available, but the team has done everything possible to make sure that we are able to lift it to the levels that are desired. And again, on the issues around the planned outages, we are sitting at around 2,888, and you can see that it's about 300 megawatts on top of what we had promised as part of our winter outlook. And this is made possible, like I said before, by the fact that we are improving on the available capacity, and as we improve the available capacity, then we are able to do what I refer to as good maintenance. And of course, the other area that has contributed to capacity available over the past week is the unplanned capacity loss factor. Again, the rate at which these units are failing, the unreliability of these units. We're trying everything possible to make sure that we have them under control. Again, this has to be understood within the context of what was the winter outlook, and in terms of the worst case scenario, we had said that the UCLF will be about 18,000 megawatts, and then in the past week we about 15,871 megawatts. It's an area of work that is receiving dedicated attention at Eskom. The lower we're able to keep this number down, the better the available capacity, and then the greater the opportunity for us to be able to do planned maintenance. And again, on the issues of the partial load losses, it's an area that still requires additional attention. Where we want to bring it lower than the 6,467 that we have experienced in the past past week rather. We really want to take it lower to just sub 5,000 megawatts. Again, you can see work in progress. We are doing everything possible to address that. Of course, the past week we also had a cold spell. It averaged about 30,633 megawatts. And of course, we're able to maintain a combination of stage 1, stage 3 for most part of the week. And that is largely in part as a result of the work that we are doing to make the capacity available, to bring down the degree and the rate at which these units are failing, and of course just toning down a bit on planned outages so that we have a maximum amount of generation capacity available to deal with the peak demand that we have experienced. Again, just to congratulate the team on that. Of course, it's still not sufficient. We want to go to a space where, of course, we're keeping to significantly lower levels of load shedding intensity during the peak. But in the context of what has been our outlook, I think the team has done relatively well. Again, an area that still requires more attention is the outage slips. Again, the outage slips means that we make the promise to return the units on a particular date, and we fail to meet our own promise. A function of planning, the team is doing everything possible to improve that area. Much early, around May, April, this number was sitting at about 2,900 megawatts. So now, the past week, we're at about 2,045. But I think there was a period in winter, in June in particular, where this figure was at about 1,330. So it does show that we do have the capacity, the know-how to bring it down. And as we bring it down, those megawatts will get to be accounted for in the available capacity, and then we're able to reduce the intensity of load shedding. I did make the point previously that what we are trying to do is to ensure that we measure our performance over a period of time. If you like a longitudinal study, the baseline that we are using is the May period, so that we have an appreciation of whether we are able to sustain this performance. Just me giving you a weekly update is not sufficient. That weekly update must be seen in the context of what was the baseline, and over a period of time, what is the kind of the trend line that we are beginning to see. And for me, this is a more telling picture. A telling picture because it does communicate whether the actions that we are introducing are beginning to give us the kind of results that are desired over a period of time. Whether we're introducing a degree of reliability, resilience in the system. And of course, I do accept that there's a degree of impatience, but for us, the best measure of our performance is how we are able to maintain the available capacity over a period of time. Of course, it will be eaten by the demand, peak demand during winter period, or it can relent the demand, and therefore the total picture is better than what we are experiencing today. So you can see now that in relation to what has been the case, we are doing well in relation to the baseline. I think the first measure there that we were checking is around the available capacity, and when we started this work, we're sitting at about 27,000 megawatts, and now as I speak to you, we are sitting at about 29,200 megawatts. So what has been the change over that a period of about 8 weeks is that we've been able to add 2,000 megawatts. Of course, in the parlance of how we measure the intensity of load shedding, that equates to about 2 stages of load shedding. And then the other measure that is important is on the unplanned capacity loss factor. Again, when we started in May, this number was hovering at about 17,000 megawatts, just above 17,000 megawatts. And then you can see now that we are about averaging about 15,000 megawatts. Of course, June was an exceptionally good period because we're at low scales of 15,000 megawatts. And the point I'm making there is that first is we are addressing the reliability or the unreliability of these units. We have reached an excellent performance in the context of the period that we are measuring. That was the June period, and we want to surpass that period now in July. And this talks to the reliability of the interventions that we are making, and that we can build some degree of confidence in the work that we are doing. And then the other one, the area of measure is around the planned outages, and this is important. You can see that when we look at the baseline figure, we're very desperate in July, in May rather. We're desperate, we kept this unit running, and in some instances we're not observing planned maintenance because we really wanted to extract as many megawatts as possible because of at the time, the energy availability factor was significantly lower than the 60% average that we have been experiencing in the June period and the early days of July. So we did everything possible to keep these units running. And as a result, you can see that the planned outages were down. But as a result of improved performance of these units, this gives us a window for us to do what we call opportunity maintenance. And we can see that we ramped it up to about 3,400 megawatts in the period of June. And now we are at about 2,858 now in July, the early part of July. And I'm very confident that as we continue to see this improvement, you'll see that we are going to use that opportunity to ensure that we build resilience in these units and we are able to add megawatts in relation to the units or take out the megawatts for planned maintenance so that as we return them, because once we return them, we have done the kind of work that is required, the intensity of the work that is required, then we are able to undermine the unplanned capacity loss factor because we'll be having some degree of confidence in relation to the work that we have done, and we can place confidence on the units and undermine them tripping from time to time, and this allows us an opportunity to have firm control of the grid, and we are not at the mercy of the units that fail from time to time. And then the other measure that we are attending to again is the partial load losses. I did indicate the partial load losses is that they were not able to maximize or optimize the installed design capacity of these units. You can see at the period of May, the partial load losses were sitting at about 6,700 megawatts. We gradually brought them down to about 6,600 megawatts, and now we're at about 6,400 megawatts. Of course, it's just 1 week in the period of August, really, and I guess that we will be able to see a much better trend line once we go deeper into the month. But the point is that we are bringing this down. So this is a positive measure. When it comes down, it means that the units are approximating their design capacity. And then the other area that is, of course, of interest is a area around peak demand. Of course, May we had, as an average, there was a significant peak at about 31,000 megawatts. And of course, when you have that significant amount of peak and acute underperformance, like I've indicated, as a result of the partial load losses, as a result of the unplanned capacity loss factor, it means that the energy available in the grid during May was significantly lower than is the case now, and the average demand was higher, and that's why there was an intense stages of load shedding. I think we sustained stage 6 load shedding for a significant period of the time of May. And of course, you can see that that demand has come down, but it's coupled with better performance on the available capacity as a result of us bringing down the unplanned capacity loss factor, bringing down issues of the partial load losses, and that's why you are seeing, if you like, a reduction in the intensity of load shedding. And we really want to maintain this trend so that we're able to go into that permutation of zero and some a degree of load shedding in the evening, and of course gradually bring it down over a period of time as we improve the performance of the units that are running and as we return the other units, and I'll indicate the work that we are doing in this regard. And then I thought that we thought that it will be important for us to take you through the work that we have done over the past 12 months. I think this is important because I think we must engender in the discourse the need for us to be transparent, the need for us to be accountable. It's one thing for the President to unveil the Energy Action Plan. It's quite another to report against the targets of the Energy Action Plan. And we really want to normalize this kind of exercise to ensure that we remain accountable. In areas where there's failure, we're the first ones to admit that we have not met our targets, and then we go further to say what are the kind of actions that we are taking to mitigate against the deterioration of that performance, and or how we return the performance to be on track in relation to the targets that we have set ourselves. And many of the areas that I'll be reflecting here really, I've spoken about them ad nauseum before, so to the extent that I've spoken about them, really, I will not repeat them. I'll just at a very high level, just indicate what we're doing. Of course, in terms of the institutional arrangement, the ministry was introduced and supported by a team of able men and women, technically astute in the energy space, across the value chain of the energy space. And of course, we are drawing also expertise from the private sector, and this body in government is called NICOM, and that's what really underpins the work that we are doing. And of course, there's a collaborative effort that we are doing with Eskom as a dominant player, both on the generation side, a monopoly on the transmission side, and a dominant player on the distribution side. So we're pulling all of these players together to ensure that the effort is an all South Africa effort. And of course, I'll share with you some of the contribution that the private sector has made. So we thought that just at a high level to say to you that about 56% of the work that we are doing is either completed or on track, and for us that's a big positive. So about 8% of these actions that the President has set out in the Energy Action Plan, we have completed those actions, and some of them I'll get to reflect on them very briefly. 20 of these actions are on track. So essentially what that means is that we are in keeping with the timelines that we had set for ourselves, the timelines that we had made public, so we remain on track. We are really not worried. If anything, we would want to deliver much earlier than promised, but the measure is around what was the initial timelines that we set for ourselves and how are we doing against those timelines. And 12 of these actions are delayed but progressing well. And of course, that's a dent, because what you want is that you are either ahead of time, or you are on time, you are scheduled, or if you are behind schedule, you are able to say what are the kind of steps that will be taken to address this. 12 of these, although they are delayed, but they are progressing well. 8 of these actions are off track, and intervention is underway. And of course, that's a big negative. Of course, like I said, 8 of them, of these actions, they are off track, so we're missing our own targets, the ones that we have set ourselves. To use the parlance of what I've been reporting during these sessions, essentially this is an outage slip. So we said that we would have achieved the following by this date. We have not achieved that, and we are making the necessary interventions to ensure that we are able to address that. And 2 of the actions have not started, and really this it's a function of at which point should these actions come into play. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are off track. It's really a timing issue. Of course, we have made those commitments, but they are still coming into the in the future. So, what is the aggregate picture? The aggregate picture is that out of 100, we get 56%. Of course, we want to be excellent students. We want to be an A+ students. We want to score 80% plus. And in fact, where we are, we want to score 100%. But we thought that we should be frank on where we are. And what are these things that we have done? Remember that the Energy Action Plan is undergirded by 5 outcomes. And I'm going to just very quickly just run through those five outcomes, the 5 objectives. The first one is around fixing Eskom and improve the availability of existing supply. And this is an area that has received an inordinate amount of attention every time when I come before you, because it's the one that gives us the best opportunity and the quickest opportunity for us to be able to get the megawatts on the grid. And that's why I make the point that Eskom is an indispensable player in the resolution of the energy crisis in the country. Of course, I did share with you that there's relative improvements. We have moved from a historic low of 48% energy availability factor when we started this work, and now we're averaging 60% of the energy availability factor. And then we have seen the reduction, like I said in the earlier slides, the reduction in the unplanned capacity loss factor. I did say that when we're in May, we're about the high end of 17,000 megawatts, and now we're at the low of 15,000 megawatts. In June, we even reached sub 14,000 megawatts, which is really an excellent performance. Again, for the partial load losses, I did indicate that at some point we're sitting above 7,000 megawatts around May, and now we are coming down. We are sitting at about 6,000 megawatts. We did indicate that in relation to the areas around the outage slips, we're sitting at about 2,900 megawatts when we started, and now we're at 2,000 megawatts. So we saved an improvement of 900 megawatts. But in June, we did achieve about 1,300 megawatts. So we are seeing that improvement. And it's a combination of the expertise that we have drawn from the private sector, the diligence with which we are applying our interventions. We are very deliberate, decisive, isolating units from one station to the other, first picking up those stations that are notorious for bringing down the energy availability factor, understanding what are those units in that particular station that are bringing us down, and then understanding what about those units that are responsible for bringing this the EAF down. And I did say before that we have identified the boiler tube leaks as one of the major challenges that is confronting us, and that's why we are having a dedicated effort to ensure that we attend to that. I've spoken about the return of Medupi and the 3 units at Kusile. I've given you the timelines. We are expecting to fire Unit 5 now in October. We are expecting the Unit 3 that were compromised by the issues around associated with the flue gas desulfurization unit, which compromised the structural integrity of the chimney. We took those out. We said we'll return the first of those 3 units late November, and the last of the 3 units will come by the 24th of December. We made the point of the intervention we have made to return early Unit 4 in Kusile, and we did say that we looked across the globe, found a second-hand generator that still had 35 years of life, and we are able to buy that. We are able to secure that. We are able to truncate the return period of Unit 4 as opposed to May of 2025. We'll be bringing it early in April of 2024. Again, National Treasury has introduced fiscal support to Eskom, the 254 billion rand. What does that do? Provide some breathing space from the point of view of the Eskom balance sheet, and then Eskom is directed to focus on maintenance of these installed units and investment on the transmission. I did share with you the work that we are doing on transmission, and I do accept that it will still not be enough. There's a need for us to find alternative ways of financing the transmission requirements. We have taken steps again to ramp up the performance of the open cycle gas turbines. Of course, the downside is that you are burning diesel, very expensive. The upside is that you are saving the South African economy, but that's not a sustainable measure. I want to emphasize. A sustainable measure is to ensure that we improve the performance of these all other units. We lift the energy availability factor. You only call on these peaking plants as and when you can't meet demand. And once you are able to sustain good performance, we don't think that you'll be calling on them as frequently as we are calling on them. And of course, the downside again is that they are not designed to be run as base load. And of course, you are shrinking, if you like, their economic life. They might fail much earlier than what is designed. So it's important that we caution on this area. We do accept that is an expedient measure. It is expedient because we are looking to save the South African economy, but it's an area of work that going forward can be addressed by us improving that the performance of the units and bringing on stream new generation capacity as quickly as possible. Objective 2 was to enable and accelerate private investment in generation capacity. You know that we have liberalized the generation side. We have removed the cap in relation to embedded generation. You don't need a license from NERSA. You simply register your project. And what has been the aggregate of this intervention is that we have seen a huge appetite, an insatiable appetite of private sector investment in the generation space. First is to address an existential and selfish question because they need to sustain their operation. The state is unable to provide on its promise to provide reliable and quality energy. They are looking at other sources of energy generation. But coupled with that is their desire to contribute towards new sources of energy, cleaner sources of energy. Some of them are forward-looking. They know that there's likely going to be an introduction of carbon borders. How you produce, if you like, end product will be measured against the energy that has been used, consumed in the production of those products, and there might be barriers into entering other lucrative markets, the more industrialized markets of the Western countries, and of course, the private sector is investing in that area. And as I speak to you, as we reported the last time, 100 of these projects representing about 10 gigawatts are in the pipeline. And we know that from the study that was done by Eskom and the industry, the renewable energy industry, there's an indication that there's 66 gigawatts of projects that are in the pipeline. So that effort has worked. So we have seen the private sector coming on stream. And then the time frames with regards to permitting and licensing, the regulatory requirements have been shrunk. We know that we have contracted that there's a significant contraction of the licensing periods. I shared with you moving down, if you like, reducing the requirements or the period for you for environmental impact assessment, for the water use licenses. So those have been brought down. And of course, our target is that you should be receiving answers in relation to those applications within 57 days. And then tied to this is the one-stop shop that was launched by DTIC Minister Patel the last time. Essentially is a portal and aggregation of all the major energy projects in the country, a single window of entry. Project developers don't have to be running around government, going to multiple players in government. We will ensure as government that we house all of those departments that are meant to play a role in licensing, in giving permissions under one umbrella. The one-stop shop is going to do that. So it's a big tick on that. And of course, we know that Eskom has leased land around several power stations in Mpumalanga for developers for private energy project. This is important because the last time when we shared with you in the last update, we did indicate that there are 2 provinces in the country where we have a significant amount of capacity available, measured against what has been the applications for renewable energy projects. Of course, it doesn't follow that all of those applications, those projects will reach financial close. But assuming that all of them will reach financial close, only 2 provinces in the country that have got sufficient capacity from a transmission side to be able to accommodate new generation. That's in Mpumalanga and Gauteng. And Eskom very deliberate, directing the market to areas where there is a grid capacity so that there's symmetry between grid capacity and opportunity for you to exploit renewables. And in that way, we are able to bring these electrons onto the grid as soon as possible. And of course, Eskom has put in place a mechanism to buy power from companies that have extra capacity available through the standard offer program. We did refer to this, the standard offer program and the emergency generation program. And out of these, we have already unlocked about 400 megawatts immediately available, and then also 600 megawatts is in the process of contracting. So these are, if you like, latent projects. They are generating. All that we needed to do is a standard offer to say, make that excess energy available to the grid, and then we have entered into that contracting 400 megawatts immediately available. We are contracting 600 megawatts. Again, the aggregate, the net is 1,000 megawatts. So it's delivering this program. If you like, now as I speak to you, 1,000 megawatt, one stage of load shedding. And then the other area is around the need for us to accelerate procurement of new capacity from renewable gas and storage. We made the point that there's that ministerial determination that has been issued and approved by NERSA for more than 14,000 megawatts of new generation capacity to be procured from a combination of wind, solar, and battery storage, and the remaining. That's part of the remaining allocation in the IRP. I think the point to be made here is that 14,000 megawatt is not arbitrary. It's meant to support, if you like, our comprehensive framework on how we are going to meet South Africa's energy requirement from various energy technologies. So when I talk battery, solar, and wind, that combination of renewable energy, so resources is derived from the size of what we can draw from that is derived from IRP. So there's a discipline that underpins the work that we're doing. We're in a crisis, we're in an emergency, but the discipline is important so that we're able to maintain sustainability going forward. And then 3 projects from the risk mitigation program are already in construction, I'm happy to report, and they will connect to the grid by end of November 2024. Again, a significant movement. We're getting additional megawatts onto the grid. Like I said earlier on, the resilience of the South African energy system and the grid is not just reliant on us improving the energy availability factor. It's a function of the rate and pace and the magnitude of the additional megawatts that we are able to get from new generating sources. And that's why we're seeing accelerated appetite by the private sector. Of course, in this instance of objective number 3 is us as the state who are inducing that private sector appetite. Objective number 2 is just private sector looking at their own requirement, what their outlook, their orientation is with regards to decarbonization, reduction of emissions. They make their own investment. In this area is the state that induces that private sector participation. And the power purchase agreement, the third area here, the power purchase agreements have been signed with 19 projects from bid window number 5 of the renewable energy program. And this will give us about, to the tune or rather, of 1,759 megawatts. And of this 1,759 megawatts, about 1,009 megawatts have achieved the commercial close, to which 780 84 of this 1,009 is already in construction. And a further 300 megawatts are anticipated to reach close and proceed to construction by the end of September. And like I said, I think the discipline is important. It's one thing to go out into the market. I think it's quite another for us to report on in terms of megawatts that we are anticipating onto the grid. Of course, it's how we are able to get this onto the grid. It's a large part on the commercial close of these projects and us giving them grid access. And I'm happy to announce that you can see from bid window number 5, there's that progress that we're making. The 6 projects from bid window 6, that totals about 1,000 megawatts, are on track to reach commercial close by the end of September of this year. This will bring the total amount of new capacity under construction from the 2 bid windows. Remember, I accounted for bid window number 5, and then I'm saying if you add that to bid window number 6, we are going to get 2,300 megawatts from the 2 bid windows. And I think for us is a commendable progress. We did make the point that we are making every effort to import additional capacity from neighboring countries. An additional 400 megawatts of power is already being imported from the Cahora Bassa in Mozambique following the strengthening of the transmission line to South Africa. And I did make the point about the work that we are doing with Mozambique, but this was a technical solution. As a result of strengthening those lines, we are able to get that 400 megawatts from Cahora Bassa, in addition to what we've been getting. And this is important at 2 levels. Hydro cheaper, but hydro greener. And I think it's important that we really do commend that work. And then the 4th area was to unleash the possibility that sits with households and industry in relation to rooftop solar. We do think that to the extent that the households and industry have got the right capital investment, the liquidity, they are able to, they meet the risk profile of the banks, they can raise the money in the banks and do this installation. Over time, they can be net generators of energy as opposed to net consumers. But in the short term, they are going to help us to relieve demand onto the grid. And therefore, we have the additional available capacity then increases because, of course, the net increases because a few of them who are placing demands on the grid will be self-sufficient, meeting their own requirements. Of course, there's tax incentives that have been introduced by the Minister of Finance, and the intention is to expand the incentives were announced, or rather expanded incentives were announced in the 2023 budget delivered by Minister Godongwana, including the rebate of 25% of the cost of the solar panels and an increased capital depreciation allowance of 125% in the first year of installation under Section 12B. And I did say that in addition to these interventions, the incentive that the minister has introduced, we are also looking at other solutions, working with the GEPF to ensure that we are able to find the financing instrument that is going to broaden, if you like, the participation rate. Of course, here, those that are able to participate are the ones who have the necessary, are sitting on the liquidity, they are unencumbered cash, they've got the right risk profile, they can raise the money in the bank. Of course, the poor are excluded, and that's why we want to introduce some instruments that will make it possible for us to broaden the flow of participation as much as possible. A draft net billing framework has been developed to standardize net billing across municipalities and is awaiting a NERSA approval. And this will ensure that all distributors have an export credit in place for small-scale embedded generators to feed into the grid. And that feed-in tariff is important. The issue for us to work out the net billing is important so that we are able to benefit from the already installed capacity. As I speak to you, are not benefiting from that because of an absence of a framework. And once we are able to finalize that framework and NERSA approves, I think we are able to take this conversation to another level to illustrate that essentially there are new generators of megawatts, of electrons rather, and this help, if you like, the grid in its totality. And of course, the amount of rooftop solar capacity in South Africa has more than doubled
And we really want to commend households and industries for the work that they've done. The total installed capacity has increased to more than 4,000 megawatts. And in the past year alone, it has doubled from about 2,300 megawatts to about 4,000 megawatts. So you can see that there's increased appetite by both household and industry to go into this space. And I really do project that once we are able to conclude this framework on the feed-in tariffs, on the wheeling and the likes, you are going to see even an accelerated appetite, rollout of this rooftop solar, because people will be seeing other revenue generating opportunities for them to participate in the renewable space. So it's not only about meeting your own demand, but it's also about generating new sources of revenue. And the last objective, it's about the fundamental reforms that we're making in the energy ecosystem in the country, to fundamentally transform the electricity sector to achieve energy security. And really the emphasis is that the exercise of these reforms is to ensure that there's energy security in the country going forward. It's one thing to say we have ended load shedding, people have got 24 hours of reliable electricity supply, but it's quite another if that available capacity is not able to sustain the kind of growth that is required. And once you resolve the immediate problem, there's going to be increased appetite by investors to invest in the South African economy. You are going to ramp up demand, and you will sit with this problem if you don't take a long-term view. So it's a combination of short-term measures to resolve the crisis, but in the course of doing that, you are orchestrating a long-term position on how we're going to resolve the energy problem. And this is what objective number 5 tries to do in part. Of course, all of the above, they contribute to energy security, not just ending load shedding. The transmission company, we spoke ad nauseum, it's got one of the 3 licenses, and we've explained that the 2 licenses will be coming on stream. The electricity regulation amendment bill was formally tabled in Parliament in July of 2023, and we are raising this with the leader of government business, the Deputy President, Minister D.P. Mashatile, to say that this is one of the priority bills that must be completed within the time and the life of the 6th administration, and we are confident that it's going to receive that attention. And then the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan is being reviewed and updated to take into account changes in Eskom's energy availability factor, as well as the cost and efficiency of various technologies. I remember that what the Integrated Resource Plan does is to first is articulating the kind of technology sources that are required. The identified technology talks about its availability and also talks about the cost associated with that. And we're making the point that it will be revised. And then work is underway. We did report extensively the last time in relation to the kind and the scale of investments that must be made on the transmission side. We made the point that we require an inordinate amount of money. The Eskom balance sheet alone will not be able to accommodate that. The sovereign balance sheet, of course, has deteriorated in part, so you need to find other sources of financing, and that's why we're looking into this area. And then as I conclude, I really want to say that part of the work that we are introducing is to ensure that we are able to address the issues around the demand. And really this is around the attitude, this is around behaviors of South Africans. And I want to emphasize that this goes beyond the crisis. This must be the new normal. Even if we get to condition of excess energy generation, we should not be complacent. The fact that I need to switch off lights in a room that is not occupied should become normal. The fact that the geyser should not be running for 24 hours should become normal. First is a saving to your bottom line. I mean, your disposable income grows because you are paying less for utilities. But secondly, it's about ensuring that we don't draw unnecessary electricity from the grid. And the third one, really, irrespective of how we are going to generate this electricity, this part of decarbonization, just using less to meet our own requirement, is important for us to address issues associated with climate change. And those are the 3 considerations. So the point I'm making is that, of course, the trigger to introduce this at an accelerated rate, very determined to do this, is the crisis. But in the long term, really, it's about the new normal. It's how things are done in the developed and industrial countries. This is how households are behaving. And I think it's something that we need to bring it home so that there's a greater appreciation. Of course, for now, contributes to the elimination of load shedding, but going into the future, talks to issues of energy security, care for the environment, addressing emissions level, addressing issues around the devastating impact of climate change. I think that's the point that we're making, and of course, NICOM has been working on that energy saving, a key pillar of our communication strategy. The demand management is the fastest and most efficient way to reduce demand, particularly during peak hours. So there's a few things that we can do, and the aggregate of those few things is going to lessen the intensity of the demand. It's quicker because we don't have to spend money. We don't have to have new generation capacity. We don't have to improve the energy availability factor. It has to do with our own behaviors on how we treat the consumption in our own households. I think we need to eliminate wastage. And this does not it doesn't mean that we need to deteriorate our quality of life. We can achieve both, maintain our quality of life, but still reduce on the demand. And our aim really is to show South Africans how easy it is for each and everyone to take charge and help reduce load shedding. And I was saying, just by switching off your lights, you are switching on lights in the South African economy. Once you reduce that consumption without deteriorating your quality of life, you are powering the South African economy. That's the point and the message that we're articulating. And then, of course, this will help to ensure that we map what demand is, especially peak demand. And once we take these actions, you will see that the demand will come lower than what has been projected. If it comes lower than what has been projected, it means that there's more megawatts on the grid. It means that we can feed industry. We don't have to have stages of load shedding. People will be into jobs. Kids will be in the class studying. Doctors will be able to perform emergency operation. Farmers will be able to produce competitively. Retail stores don't have to run generators, pass on this inordinate amount of cost to the end consumer. We are able to contribute to bringing down inflation. We are able to make a case that we have eliminated load shedding. We don't need an aggressive stance with regards to microeconomic policy. The MPC, Mr. Lesetja Kganyago, makes the point that one of the structural constraints in the South African economy, that which impedes growth, is load shedding. So all of our actions, the aggregate of these actions, are going to help us to eliminate load shedding and make sure that the South African economy grow. Those that are out of employment are in employment. The small businesses are able to operate. Township businesses are able to operate. Farmers are able to produce. We are able to address the issues of food security. And of course, we think that ending load shedding as quickly as possible. I think that is the message that we are conveying to everyone. By reducing the amount of electricity that we use through simple action, we can reduce load shedding while saving on energy bills. I do make the point that there's a nexus there. You are able to resolve load shedding and there's more money to your pockets, assuming that the municipalities are not making estimations, and then you are able to spend in the South African economy, and the aggregate is that we'll be able to see the kind of growth that we desire. There are tips for households in relation to when to switch off these geysers. The peak period, the PM peak, is the one that is hitting us. And that's why you can have stage 1 of load shedding and then go to stage 3 or stage 4 in the peak, because there's a surge in demand. And what contributes there, it's, of course, some of these things are your geysers. We don't use them. We're cooking. We're doing all sorts of things. No one is taking a bath at that time in many households, but the geyser is consuming energy and is the biggest guzzler of energy. You do that in the evening. This is going to help us to ensure that we are able to address this situation. Again, setting your geyser at the right temperature up to 60 degrees. Don't take it lower than 60 degrees because this can increase the level of bacterial growth. So we are advising, I want to emphasize, don't take it below 55 degrees, take it to 60 degrees. Go to your geyser now you'll see it's set at very, very high temperatures. We can get it at 60 degrees. You are reducing this consumption. For every 10-degree reduction, of course, you'll save up to 5%. You plug the appliances as and when you need them. Many of us are guilty of that. You charge your phone. The plug is forever in the socket. You are charging. And then you finish charging, you take it out, you take the phone out, but you don't take the plug out. It's still drawing from the grid. It could be taking up to 50% of what it needs. But on the other end, it's not charging anything. So it's those simple measures that we suggest that we take to ensure that we address this. The kettle, the electric kettle is there, it's plugged. No one is making coffee, no one is making tea. You simply remove the plug. It's those simple actions. Now they appear to be trivial to you. But once we aggregate all of these things, 2 stages of load shedding will be saved. And this is not a bluff, it's scientific. We can bring this down. And I'm sure those of you who are watching, just go. The electric plug is on. The cell phone charger is on, but it's in your pocket, no one is charging. The iPad, the computer plug is on, no one is charging. So it's important that we bring this to the attention of South Africa. It's a new normal. It's saving you on the cost that you need to pay at the end of the month to the municipality. It has an impact on your disposable income, but it's helping us. Once we pull all of these things together, we're at stage 1, we should not be having load shedding. But we are drawing onto the grid, even in instances where we don't need that. And of course, businesses, the same connected photocopy machine. These days, no one photocopies that often. But the photocopy machine is on 24 hours of the day. It's drawing from the grid. That's the point that we were making. The energy of energy efficient lighting. I made the point to my peers. Some of the buildings that are complicit for consuming energy at night when there's no one in the office is government buildings. And that's why Minister Zikalala is taking every action to address that. He'll be launching a program on energy savings, utility savings, water, electricity, and waste, solid waste. He'll be introducing that. It is informed by this exercise. The state must also take the lead, must lead by example. And then there's a need for businesses. You can conduct energy saving audits. It's going to contribute to your bottom line. So we have done some work and so that's our story. The story is twofold. There's nothing new about switching off, and it's the Miriam Makeba song. I can't do that quick thing, but it's that. Yes, that. Okay. Thank you very much, Sol, for saving me. But thank you very much, Sis. Oh, yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, and I'm sure all of us, we are reminded of what we know, the just click. Colleagues, we're now going to move to the questions. We'll start from the room. Introduce yourself, the media house that you are representing, and you ask your question. Then after we move to the questions that are from the media houses, the representatives that are joining online. The Minister of Electricity is going to be assisted by Mr. Rudy Dix from Presidency, who is connected online as well. But I think we're now familiar with his face. Colleagues from the room, do we have any questions? Even Antoinette today is satisfied. Yes. Vanessa, is it you or Tagalani who's reading? Or Tagalani? Can you take us through the questions?
Thank you, DG. The first question is from Angelo Coppola from the CGTN. And the question is, how is government going to incentivize the private sector to to get involved in electricity generation. And there's two questions from Helmo from Independent Media. The first is the number of gigawatt hours lost due to load shedding increased in July compared with June. What is the expectation for August? And why did the import less power in June than we did in January? And we have Carol Patton from News 24. Minister, can you tell us if you are now any wiser on what is happening at OPEC and the timelines will be to return Unit 1? And Carol again, the National Nuclear Regulator was intending to brief the media on Friday on the OPEC long-term license, but has cancelled this until further notice, and what lies behind this. And we have Spendable from Business Report. The first question is, in rand terms, how much diesel has been burnt on OCGTs to keep the lights on in the 12 months since the injection plan was implemented? And what is the update regarding the possible shutdown of Tutuka Power Station, because Eskom seemed to indicate that it was rethinking that decision during Scopa's oversight visit in June. And Helmo, again from Independent Media, can you please update us on what is happening with car power ship, and what is the current capacity of embedded generation? And we have Aisha from Network 24. And the question is, the minister said that they are hoping to end load shedding as soon as possible, and any definite deadline for this. And Carol again from News 24. The minister, can you please clarify who appoints the board of the National Transmission Company? Is it the Eskom board? Is it the Minister of Public Enterprises? And how far is this process? And we have the last question, I think, from Helma again. When do you expect to announce the new Eskom CEO? That's all for now. Thanks, Steve.
We'll get Rudy to go ahead, just take a few responses. Rudy, can you come in? Unmute,
So,
Rudy.
most thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, so Monday, morning, Minister, morning, colleagues over there. I had very difficulty in hearing the questions, except that I just heard the last question I could hear just on the NTC appointment, right? Colleagues, as you've indicated previously, the NTC appointment is, of course, in terms of the unbundling of Eskom, the National Transmission Company becomes a subsidiary as part of the roadmap of Eskom. The long-term process for the NTC would become a complete standalone, because, of course, in a competitive market space, under the new Electricity Regulatory Act, the National Transmission Company, or the system operator, would have to purchase energy from Eskom and private generators, right? So, of course, on a competitive basis. But for now, as part of the first step, it is a subsidiary. This means, of course, that as a subsidiary, the board of Eskom would have the responsibility of appointing the board of the NTSA, in consultation with the shareholder, which is, of course, the Department of Public Enterprises. As it is right now, this has not been finalized. It is an ongoing process. As I understand it, that there are in place a number of measures to ensure that this is expedited, and I've been told that this is underway, right? The second one, Minister, that I do have here now, what incentives are in place for private investment in electricity and what is the current capacity of embedded generation? I mean, I think, Minister, as you've indicated on the entire progress that we've made, particularly in unlocking private sector generation, what we have done is phenomenal, as you've indicated. We changed Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulatory Act, and Schedule 2 really was what allowed for registration versus licensing. And we changed that threshold initially to 100 megawatts, which meant that if you could simply register a plant at utility scale, which is 100 megawatt, without having to go through onerous licensing procedures. So that in itself was an important incentive. In December 2022, Minister of DMR removed that threshold completely, which meant that you had no threshold at all for wanting to register an embedded generation, as we refer to, a private sector generation plant. And I think this is quite important for us. As of now, I mean, as you can see with the data that we've released over there, we, through NECOM, we're tracking about 10,000 megawatts, that's 10 gigawatts of embedded generation projects. This started off as part of a project that we had worked on with the Minerals Council and the private sector on tracking specifically where each and every one of those 10,000 megawatt projects, that's about 104 projects altogether that we are tracking. So there is significant incentive for private sector embedded generation projects to continue. We of course know if we use different data sets, we can see, for instance, if you just look at budget quotes that have been issued, this is about 13.3 gigawatts. And as you've mentioned in the one-year report, based on data that we've been able to gather from different data points, there is a potential of 66 gigawatts. So it is limitless, and the amount of investment that is there. Of course, what we need to ensure for us to be able to derive the benefit of that investment is certainly have the investment in grid capacity expanded as a matter of urgency, or we don't derive that benefit as a matter, as quickly as possible. And as you have mentioned in the reports itself, and over the time periods that we've been doing this media brief, that much of the investments in grid capacity, the 25 transformer projects, for instance, conversations around private sector investment within strengthening the grid and expanding the grid through different models of ownership, for instance, around expanding the grid, and a number of other projects, for instance, to be able to do that. That's going to be critical, including whether we look at spatial dimensions to future grid windows. We know, of course, there was one particular instance where Eskom had issued through the land lease program to try and get people to be incentivized by investing close onto land where there were power stations, for instance, and that land lease program has yielded 1,800 megawatts. So we're going to have to think creatively to harness that significant potential that's there in private sector embedded generation projects that there. Most of them, of course, are renewable, and that's quite important. So by unlocking Schedule 2 and removing the threshold, you've seen significant incentives. The second part of it, Minister, is that you have also illustrated the importance of reducing timeframes in getting to financial close and construction. And this is quite important because ultimately what you want is a shorter time frame if you talk about registration versus licensing. And of course what we have significantly done is reduced, for instance, EIAs from about 120 days. We've registered that, and you've been instrumental when you were the head of ISA in ensuring that many of the renewable energy projects under the embedded generation projects were registered as SIPS projects. That automatically reduces the EIA time frame to 57 days. We were able to reduce registration days in NERSA from 90 days to 19 days. We've been able to significantly reduce water use license applications. We've been able to significantly reduce land use authorization processes to to under 3 months, from 90 days to 3 months. From 90 days to a month. And there are many other interventions that we've been able to do, for example, on land exempting projects, both transmission and PV projects on land which has low levels of environmental sensitivity, and this is quite important for us. So this is critical for us as part of the ongoing investments, and as you can see, that has helped us. On the third question that I want to answer, the fourth question, which is on the OCGTs, yes, of course, what has happened in the planning process and through the multi-year price determination that NERS has given, at the request for the price increases by Eskom, does sufficiently cover the total amount that includes the amount of diesel for OCGTs, and that's quite important. Those calculations have been covered and would significantly so cover the amount of diesel as it is right now. Of course, if there are significantly and extreme stages of load shedding, then the burn rate would be much higher, and that may deplete reserves, that may deplete the entire budget. But as it is right now, if we maintain the level of load shedding and of course move towards reducing and eliminating it entirely, then of course this would ensure that Eskom has sufficient budget cover for it. But on the basis of what we did at the beginning of the year and through the price determination, the multi-year price determination that NERS has provided, that there is sufficient budget as it is right now for the OCGTs going forward. Thank you, Minister. And also apologies for not being there as I'm still recovering from flu, but I hope those answers to those questions have been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rudy. Maybe just on that question, just to expand it a bit, I think what Spiro was saying was how much have we spent of that allocation. So Rudy does make the point that in the computation of the tariff increase, there was that 8 billion that was ring-fenced to procure diesel, and in the 254 fiscal relief, there was 32 billion rands that was ring-fenced for diesel, so the total is 30 billion. So I think Sperelo's question is how much of that has been spent to date. I don't have that figure, Sperelo. I'm sure you allow us, we can share it the next time when we meet. But I think the principal point to make here is that we have never disguised our intention to run the open cycle gas turbine in the context of the crisis that is confronting us, and especially during the period of May. Remember, I gave you the numbers that demand was surging and the available capacity was at its lowest. So one of the remedies that is at our disposal, as Rudy was making the point, to reduce the intensity of load shedding is really to have the OCGT on load, and that's you are burning diesel really, and that comes at the extraordinary cost. But the long and short spell is that we will make an effort to share that with you. Our colleagues from Eskom were meant to join us. They couldn't. There was a technical issue here to give them the right to speak, and that's why I'm not in a position to answer the first set of questions from Helmut on the issue around why is it that we imported less power compared to the period of January. I don't go to that level of granularity, but I do give you that undertaking. Your two questions, the first set of questions in the next iteration of this briefing, we should be in a position to answer them. And then Carol, on your first set, just on Quebec, like I did say the last time, that we're requesting an engagement with the board, written to the board, just to get that indication, because I think it's important that when we get to make an absolute statement before the South African public and interested parties like yourselves is really aligned to the information that I'll be getting from the board. I did discover my own when I was engaging with the management at Quebec, so we will get that, and like I said, the promise I made before, I will be able to share with you.
Against Pelele on Tutuka. No. The last time when I was here, first is to say that Tutuka is our worst performing power station. Each pack should be giving us about 560 megawatts. I think it's performing at 11%. And one of the first actions that Mr. Ngumalu took when he became the head of generation was to take one of our most seasoned and experienced general managers. Mr. Bruce Moyo is there at Tutuka, and the intention is that there's a few units that we should be returning back to service late August, early September. And in fact, this month we'll be going to Tutuka just to get an indication on the exact timelines and how are we doing against those timelines. So first is that no, Tutuka is not going to be closed. Secondly is that we are doing everything possible to return those units parallel. And then on the question around ending load shedding, the date, I always make the point. So I'm saying that I've been assigned the responsibility working with NUCOM. We want to get as many megawatts onto the grid as possible. And I'll tell you why that answer is very difficult to extract. First is that we'll show you the performance on the energy availability factor and then translate that into megawatts. Tell you about the actions that we are taking, of course, sourcing from new generation players. We did share with you the megawatts on the standard offer program, what we are importing, on the issues around the embedded generation, what is the pipeline of project, what we anticipate to come on stream. I shared with you what is going to come from bid window 5 and 6 put together. We're expecting 2,300 megawatts. But then there's one area, so you can get to a stage where, I mean, at the time when the president announced was that we were short of 6,000 megawatts. I mean, at the rate at which we are working, when we return the units at Kusile, when we return the units at Tutuka, we should be able to get that 6,000 megawatts. But load shedding will not be gone, you'll be suspending it. Because for as long as you are not able to meet what is the anticipated growth and the kind of energy generation that must support it, it's going to confront you in the future. That's a simple point I'm making. And of course, now we're entering the summer period. Demand is going to be a bit stunted. It will taper down, create, of course, and then with the kind of improvement that we're making, the energy availability factor will be bolstered by the return of the Kusile units, like I've mentioned, the connection of these renewable energy projects from private sector by November of 2023, the anticipated returns of the units at Tutuka, because demand has gone down, the energy availability factor has gone up, then we're fine. But I am saying to you, we have not resolved load shedding. We have not resolved the ability of South Africa to meet the energy demand that is required for you to be able to power the South African economy. And then it will come back. Unless we are able to accelerate the kind of work that we've been sharing with you, the issues on the transmission side, very important. The issues on the distribution side, very important. We're working on that, and at the right time, we'll be able to say that. Now, when I stand before you and say, we have ended load shedding, I would have answered that question. Essentially to say, if we had a winter day today with a peak of 34,000 megawatts, having built into that the reserve margin, having built into that the ability for us to take out the units for planned maintenance, have been built into that because for any engineering component there's an inherent failure of risk. You are not going to eliminate the unplanned capability loss factor. Having taken into that the unplanned capability loss factor, if then we have we are generating sufficient to accommodate all of that, then you will have ended load shedding. Otherwise, it's something that's a moving target. You are kicking the can down the road, and I'm not in a position to give you an absolute date now. As I speak to you, I can tell you that it's going to reduce significantly going into the summer months. And in fact, you are going to have days where there's no load shedding, and those days will be sustained for a period of time. But for as long as you have not answered all those other questions, you can't confidently say it's gone. We need to accelerate. Even if we don't have, we can have a week, we can have a month of no load shedding. We must work tirelessly to ensure that we build sufficient capacity and resilience to resolve this question. And that's why the issues of car powership are important. That emergency energy generation. Of course, I said the last time, they are going through the process, the issues of with the Department of Environment. I saw there's also extended the period with regards to grid access. What I shared with you the last time was that we are having an engagement with the IPP. I think we need to get to a stage where there's certainty in relation to this program. I mean, it's 3 years into this procurement program, and yet the megawatts are not on the grid. And when we introduce it, we said it's emergency, we need to make this intervention. It can't be that 3 years later, I'm still talking the same language. And that's the point that they were raising. And at the right time, I'll tell you, within absolute terms, where we are, if this program comes to an end and we are restarting a new program, I'll be the first one to share that with you. But for now, I am not in a position to, because there are still those processes that are being undertaken with sister departments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're going to be taking the last round of questions. Antoinette, I think you're the only one inside. Yes, you can come through.
Minister, from our board. Minister, I just want to check, you've been saying before that the car powership projects, the length of the contracts should rather be 5 years than the 20 years that was contracted, or that was part of the procurement process. What is being done around that term of the contract?
Thank you, Antoinette. Dagalani, can you take us through the online questions?
Thanks, Gigi. It's only 2 questions which I suppose are the last. The first one is just a follow-up question from Carol, who said the field broke when the minister was saying what the source of the 22 billion rand for diesel is. So Carol is just asking if the minister can make perhaps a repeat. And the last question from Carol is from the presentation. Essentially from the presentation, it doesn't seem clear what the 2 storage interventions and 8 off-track ones are. And asking if the minister can elaborate. Thank you.
Let Rudy do those 2.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll start with Rudy, who will take the first 2 questions, the last 2 questions. And then we'll move to Minister so that he can also wrap up as well. Rudy?
Monty, I didn't get the last. I'm sorry, I'm really struggling to get the questions from the floor there.
The two actions that are out have not started.
The 2 actions that have not started, Rudy, which are they?
Oh, the 2 actions that have not started yet.
Yes.
Yes, just give me a second quickly. The 2 actions that haven't started yet is... just give me a second, I'll find it right now. The first one is, of course, is the mechanism to be able to track in a formal way the uptake on rooftop PV. As it is, colleagues, one of the problems that we do sit with is that we didn't introduce an adequate registration regime, and many of the municipalities were Johnny come late, including Eskom. So of course, as the crisis perpetuated, many households, for example, that could afford went off the grid, but were, there was no system for formal registration. So what we are trying to do, of course, is to introduce this. We have a particular project that we are discussing this with the World Bank through the DMRE to try and ensure that we get more or less to a precise number of rooftop PVs that we have across the country. Many municipalities have now started introducing the registration, but there's quite a big chunk of them that we don't. So that's the one project that hasn't started yet. And the second one that hasn't started yet, sorry, I'm just trying to, second one that hasn't started yet is, I'm trying to find this.
We'll share the second project later, colleagues. It will be posted on the responses.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll share that as it goes along, okay? Sorry
Yeah.
about that. I can't see the second project that is not started yet.
Yeah, I think they also needed to know some of the aid that are off track. Maybe if we give them an indication through that process. And Antoinette, no, you're absolutely correct. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. We still steadfast on the fact that the contracting period should not be more than 5 years. Of course, when it went out, it was a period beyond 5 years. So it's part of what is in the basket of those discussions. Where we are, we don't think that you can expose the country to that kind of pricing over that period of time. There's a particular crisis that we are resolving, and the solution must meet our description of the crisis. We don't anticipate the crisis to be with us for the next 20 years, otherwise it's going to be exceptionally expensive, and we will not be doing justice to the South African people. That's a position we've taken. Carol, I hope you can hear me. So I was trying to, when I was answering Siphelele's question on OCGT, I was just trying to explain the sources of the funding. So the first one is in the NERSA approved tariff increase that was granted to Eskom. 8 billion rands of that was ring-fenced for procuring diesel. And then of the 254 billion rand fiscal relief that the Minister of Finance has given to Eskom, 22 billion of that was ring-fenced for purchase of diesel, so put together is 30 billion rands. But I was saying to Siphelele that, because this question is pointed, of that 30 billion rand, that allocation, how much of it has been spent so far to date? And I was saying I don't have an answer, and I'm sure we can share that with you going forward. Because I think part of the work that we're doing is to be as transparent as possible, because this is the people's money. I think it's important will be held accountable for that. And then as I conclude, I forgot to mention that we have our website now is now live. We call it Take Charge South Africa, Take Charge SA. .co.za. So you can go there to get the tips on how to save energy, so on and so forth. You'll see a bit more interactive. So we really want to take the opportunity to thank everyone that has made time, members of the media, creating this platform for us to share with the people at home the kind of questions, the robustness that you are asking the question. I think is most welcome to help us to clarify the issues and also be held accountable. But once more, thank you very much. We wish you a pleasant week ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you so much to all the media houses that have connected and strive to make sure that the South Africans are informed. And thank you so much, colleagues. We really appreciate your presence. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.